What is going on, everybody? So I just finished making the ROG Ally 6-month review, and it didn't turn out quite as I thought it would, because the Steam Deck OLED model was just announced the day I was posting that review. Then I had to edit it and add some regrets. But we're not here to talk about that today. But I have been playing the ROG Ally non-stop since its initial release, and there have been a lot of games that came out on Steam and other launchers, and indirectly for the ROG Ally Windows handheld. And it's crazy for me to say Windows handheld, because I never thought a handheld such as the ROG Ally would be readily available like it is for pretty much half a year. And there have been games that came out on the Windows platform that have been, for lack of the better word, impossible to play on handhelds. But for the most part, ROG Ally doesn't really struggle with these titles, especially when it's docked in either turbo 25 watt or 30 watt mode. But for other lower TDP handhelds like the Steam Deck, these games are pretty much impossible to play on even the newest OLED model. But I have been playing these games non-stop since all of them released at the most a couple months ago. And I figured I'd make a list on what are the best games on ROG Ally to play almost exclusively in turbo mode. So I decided to make a list on what are the best games to play docked on the ROG Ally and what will work the best in turbo mode or just docked at 30 watts mode. And of course, you can find other ways to play these games in performance mode, but for these 5 specific titles, they work best in turbo mode. And the first game on the list is Alan Wake 2. Now, this game has a lot of issues on lower TDP handhelds and anything that isn't Windows. But on the ROG Ally, I already finished this title and haven't run into any big issues with it yet. I've been playing in 1080p medium settings, mostly in turbo mode. So that means that the battery's not going to last very long unless you have a power bank. And for the most part, I enjoy playing this game docked because it looks fantastic on the ROG Ally and especially on my television. With a horror game as epic as Alan Wake 2, I figure it's best to play it docked, just because the battery is not going to last that long, and it does leave you to want an even bigger battery for ROG Ally. But these are games that have a lot of issues playing on any other handheld, and I feel like the ROG Ally just manages power so much better because it's had more time, more popularity, and attention given to it. So with Alan Wake 2, I mostly leave the settings in medium and play on turbo and 1080, and the game looks fantastic. It mostly runs at 30 to even 40 FPS in some areas with no problems. And in the game, you have sort of a mind palace. So every time you press start, you go to a completely different area. It basically loads 2 different locations at the same time. So Alan Wake 2 needs a lot of processing power. In fact, when you first start up the game, it tells you that you need at least 16 gigs of RAM to play it. So you're going to have to put the ROG Ally's VRAM settings to auto, opposed to anything else, just to start Alan Wake 2. It is quite the demanding game that needs specific settings to even start it. And I think it's mainly because of that Mind Palace feature in the game where it loads 2 things at the same time. I find that so ridiculous. They could have just made a start menu or an inventory space, but I know that the game, from the later points in it, makes the most out of the Mind Palace area. Now, Alan Wake 2 is not a perfect game, but it is pretty damn scary, and it looks absolutely insane. For a second, I checked online to see if it was using Unreal Engine 5 because the visuals were just so insane, especially in handheld mode. But it's actually not using Unreal Engine 5, surprisingly. Remedy decided to use a different engine for it, and I think it looks phenomenal either way. But yeah, it's definitely worth checking out Alan Wake 2, especially if you have an ROG Ally, because for the most part, this game is just not going to work right on the Steam Deck, no matter how much shader cache you download for this title. And the second game on the list is pretty damn infamous, but I managed to complete it on the ROG Ally with a lot of optimizations and even some Steam Deck mods implemented into it, and that game is Returnal. For the most part, I played in 720p with RSR enabled, turbo mode, and the game actually runs at 40 to 50 FPS for me. Now, most of the settings are low, like shadows, ambient occlusion, but the textures are set to medium or high in some areas. But where this game really shines is in 30 watt mode, plugged in or docked. So while docked, Returnal actually plays pretty damn well. In some places, the FPS even reaches 50, but that's very rare. For the most part, you're going to see 40 to 45 consistently if you're lucky. And the main reason why this game is on the list is because, yet again, it is a game that does not work on Steam Deck. Now, I didn't pick these games according to their compatibility with Steam Deck Deck. It just so happened to be a coincidence that they just do not work on the system. And Returnal is just one of those games that just doesn't start or play properly on the Steam Deck. Even the OLED model has a lot of issues with it, and it's rendered unplayable. But on the ROG Ally, it's actually pretty darn impressive to play this game plugged in or just in turbo mode at 720p. And sure, Returnal does suffer for the lower resolution because it is supposed to be a fast-paced shooter, but for the most part, the ROG Ally can hold its own with Returnal. But just as a warning, there are going to be some bosses that push the system to its absolute limit. Now, Returnal hasn't ever crashed on my ROG Ally, but there will be some bosses that unleash certain attacks that push the processing power to its very limit, to the point that it goes almost in the single digits. That's only for a few seconds. This game still needs a ton of optimization. Even with my 3060, it has a lot of stutters, and it's definitely a title that was mainly made for the PlayStation 5's SSD specifically. So if you don't install Returnal on an extremely fast SSD, then tough luck. You're gonna see a lot of stutter while you're playing this title, especially on a handheld like the ROG Ally, and you won't really even be able to play the game on the Steam Deck. I remember the first time it came out and I tried it on my Steam Deck. I bought Returnal instead of Wanted Dead, and Wanted Dead ended up being verified while Returnal was just not compatible at all. The game just kept crashing and going in the single digits even. And that's when I decided maybe I'll just upgrade my graphics card and play Returnal there. Returnal was actually the first game that led me to want even more power, like Virgil, with handheld devices. And it's the main reason why, instead of getting a second Steam Deck, I ended up buying the ROG Ally, because I just wanted more power to play games like Resident Evil 4 Remake and Returnal. And even till this day, Returnal just doesn't play that well on the Steam Deck, to the point it's just unplayable. But I am happy to say that ROG Ally can handle the game for the most part. It still has a lot of improvement to take on in the future, and at this point I'm not really sure if Returnal's ever going to play properly on a handheld. But I hear the Lenovo Legion Go handles the game very well because of its RAM, but for the most part I'm happy with it on the ROG Ally. And the third game is a game I just completed on the ROG Ally, and it just simply wouldn't start on my Steam Deck, and that is The Quarry. The Quarry is actually a game that isn't compatible with Steam Deck till this day, and it was very disappointing to me to actually buy the game to play it on the Steam Deck and for it to just not start at all. The game just kept crashing after the first 10 minutes, and the compatibility page on Reddit has just gone silent for the Steam Deck, so I'm assuming it just doesn't work anymore. I'm not even going to re-download it for my Steam Deck because it's like a 100 gigabyte game, but I have recently beat it on the ROG Ally exclusively, and I played for the most part docked because I wanted to play it in co-op. I tend to enjoy playing story-driven games like The Quarry and Heavy Rain or Detroit Become Human, while switching the controller between friends and family for each character to make the choices even more spontaneous. So I mainly play The Quarry docked, but for the most part in performance mode, it actually plays very well on the ROG Ally, and that's with most of the settings high at 1080p. There are really no caveats to playing The Quarry on ROG Ally portable, but the game just looks incredible while docked, and 30-watt mode definitely helped the experience a great deal. But if you want to play The Quarry handheld, like with the rest of the games on this list, it works perfectly fine in performance mode, and especially turbo mode, but it really shines in 30-watt mode. And if you even care, I managed to beat The Quarry with unfortunately 3 people down by the end, and that was like in the last 10 minutes of the game. There is an issue with the analog stick in The Quarry. I'm not sure if it's just the game, but I advise enabling the option to play with the D-pad, because there's going to be a lot of sections in The Quarry that require you to dodge enemies or run in specific directions, and sometimes the analog stick just doesn't register the correct direction. So that led me to kill off one character and a couple other ones, mostly by mistake. But yes, I highly recommend playing The Quarry specifically on the ROG Ally because it is a smaller device and a little more portable than the other handhelds on the market, with that extra ridiculous power boost. And the fourth game on the list is something that I've been working on beating for a long time, and I finally got around to it just recently, and that is Dead Island 2. Now, I play this game for the most part in 1080p, but I do recommend playing in 900p because the game just runs almost flawlessly with that resolution. But I'm stubborn, so I put the game in 1080p and enable FSR 2.0 in quality mode, and the game plays fantastic. And in handheld mode, the VRR kicks in just like it does with all the rest of these games on the list and makes the play experience so smooth. VRR helps all these games in such an expansive way that I can't even stress enough how important it is for a handheld device such as the ROG Ally and even the Steam Deck. I wish every single device would have VRR because playing games like Dead Island 2 and Resident Evil 7, putting them at almost max settings at 1080p will make the game stutter a lot if you're playing on a TV, but if you have a monitor that has VRR or if you're playing on the ROG Ally, VRR makes so much of a difference, especially when it comes to games like Dead Island 2. And Dead Island 2 is a great game. It's hilarious and very creative in a lot of sections. But there is some kind of repetition when it comes to the game. You find someone at a home, you need to help them, you need to do a mission for one person so you can get like a battery or something. It's always these big favors that you pull off that mostly have to do with crushing in a zombie's head or punching them to death just to get a simple resolution or item that's preventing you from progressing. So to say the least, Dead Island 2 is fantastic on the ROG Ally, and I wholeheartedly recommend it specifically for the ROG Ally. I can't speak for other handhelds on the market, how they would perform with this game, but Dead Island 2 did have a ton of issues on the Steam Deck and other handhelds in the market. But from the first day, ROG Ally just didn't have any problems. And I'm happy to report that it is an exceptional game to play while docking your ROG Ally as well. And the last game on the list was called an impossible port on the Nintendo Switch specifically, and on the Steam Deck there have been a little bit of issues with Mortal Kombat 1, but I played and completed the whole game on ROG Ally, and for the most part Mortal Kombat 1 just plays perfect on the ROG Ally, especially docked. And the reason why I play it mostly docked is because it is a fighting game. Playing it with a friend or family member is the best experience you could possibly get. Now, I didn't expect this game to work as good as it does with my Ally, but it plays just as good as Mortal Kombat 11, and I was pleasantly surprised because of all the performance issues I was hearing about Mortal Kombat 1. In fact, a lot of people would prefer Street Fighter 6 over Mortal Kombat 1 because MK1 just is disappointing. And on the Steam Deck, I heard that you even need to update SteamOS to the Preview 3.5 version just to get Mortal Kombat 1 to perform a lot better. And that's unfortunate because I don't really like preview updates for Steam Deck. Every time I try to update to one of those Preview OS versions, I end up going through a lot of issues, especially with the plugins. And plugins and customization is very important to me on the Steam Deck, so I just couldn't play Mortal Kombat 1 on my Steam Deck. But on the ROG Ally, I didn't really need to do anything special. It just worked exceptionally well for the most part. There were a few times where the frames dipped to around 10 FPS randomly, but I think that's just some of the stages loading up or the textures loading. And that made me think the ROG Ally would benefit greatly if it compiled shaders just like the Steam Deck. But I know that would be very complicated, but I can't even imagine how fast games would load up and how well they would perform if there was some kind of setting in Steam that enables even more shader compilation or a pre-shader compile feature where you can just download all the shaders at once. But instead, you need to go to the AMD software if you want to free up some shader cache, which is awesome because it's official AMD software that enables you to just delete shaders whenever you want for games like The Last of Us Part 1 and Starfield. But yeah, so far, Mortal Kombat 1 is playing phenomenally on the ROG Ally, and it's having a few issues on the Steam Deck. And I kind of figured this would happen. I mean, when it comes to just selling and working on computers for most of my life, there are certain pieces of hardware like the Nintendo Switch and Steam Deck where I look at them and I can just see, just like in Death Note, an expiration date over their head. So I naturally saw that within the middle of the first year of the Steam Deck, surprisingly, because there were a surprising amount of games that just didn't work right in month 6. And surprisingly, after 6 months with the ROG Ally, I'm not really looking at it like hardware that's going to expire soon. I think it's going to live well into the next 2 years, if I'm being completely honest. And I would give it a maximum of 2 years until we start seeing declining performance with newer titles. Maybe with MK2, there's going to be a lot of issues on the ROG Ally. But for right now, before anything like the ROG Ally 2 comes out, so far, these titles that I would classify as impossible actually work exceptionally well on the ROG Ally. I didn't think they would work this well. I thought it would just be a little better than the Steam Deck, but most of these titles perform 50% better than the Steam Deck, especially when it comes to power draw. But it's just those extra cores that allow the ROG Ally to perform so much better, even than the OLED Steam Deck model. And I'm just so happy to have this handheld. And after the Legion Go was released, I couldn't help but notice that I didn't feel like the ROG Ally was already outdated because it's so much smaller than the Legion Go. Even with the detachable controllers, I just see that as a gimmick that people aren't really going to use that much. But it's so reassuring to know that the ROG Ally is still the best and most easily accessible handheld on the market, simply because its power and also how it operates Windows 11. I think the Armory Crate software has been making my time with the ROG Ally a lot easier, especially when I just want to switch modes or customize fan curves or the TDP. There's just so much customization you can do with Armory Crate, and it's so easy. Even dummies can do it. And I feel like that's not the same thing that I could say for the Steam Deck. A lot of Steam Deck features aren't as simple as Armory Crate's features. And that's a good and bad thing, because for the most part, you can just fully customize ROG Ally if you really wanted to. You could download a third-party software to make those games run even faster, or overclock the ROG Ally CPU to push it even further beyond turbo mode if you really wanted to. But for the most part, I'm just going to use the default software because I don't want my ROG Ally to die in the next year or so. In fact, I'm working on getting a second ROG Ally, but I really hope that ROG Ally 2 comes out in at least 6 months, because I would rather have an ROG Ally 2 and just transfer my data from one ROG Ally to its successor. That would be awesome. But for the most part, these are the 5 impossible games that work best for ROG Ally. And thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any games that just don't work on any other handheld except for ROG Ally, or just don't work on your Steam Deck but work on your Ally, let me know in the comments. I hope you guys have a good one. Later.